Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing The Handmaiden. This film came out in 2016. It was directed by Park Chan-wook. Park Chan-wook for me is one of the most bold and most interesting directors that is working today. And he of course hails from South Korea. He often makes very operatic, very heavy pieces of filmmaking that have a kind of a Greek tragedy or Shakespearean tragedy sort of feel to them. And I think he really just genuinely wants you to feel his joy in terms of the act of creativity, the act of filmmaking. In order to do that, he has to push his audience in bold ways into maybe grittier or more seedy aspects of typical allegories. I think he understands how much artful manipulation plays a part in our experience as voyeurs, as audience members, how much someone's actions can matter based on what you know about them. And therefore, he is quite the trickster in terms of how he is presenting that to us. And he's constantly shifting the narrative around the structure very playfully. And it honestly feels as if his entire career was sort of building to this point. It is one of those movies for me because I do think, yes, it is certainly one of his most ambitious projects ever from nearly every single angle. And it is one of those movies where after I saw it, I was kind of like, ooh, how am I going to review this? It's just because it is just so overwhelming, emotionally, cerebrally. It is one of the most intricately woven mysteries I've seen in a long time. And I just love the way it slowly reveals itself. That's one of the best parts about the entire film, how it opens slowly. But there are all kinds of things going on at the same time. It's kind of like breathing in and out. It feels very kaleidoscopic. Every single little piece that's working to create this feeling, this image has to fall right into place. And everything matters in order to create that overall effect. And if you are the type of person that is, like a cinephile, if you are a Park Chan-wook fan, then, I think that you'll be floored by this film if you haven't seen it, because when I was done watching it, I was absolutely buzzing with just inspiration. When I think about this film just by design in terms of the structure, it reminds me of one of those like modern sculptures that you might see that is like balanced in such a way and it looks almost like an illusion. And you're kind of wondering to yourself, it's like, how is it positioned in such a way that it's not completely collapsing in on itself? And yet, for whatever reason, you're not sure how it's working, and yet it is working absolutely perfectly. And I feel like that's this movie. Just one little thing, if you were to tamper with one tiny little thing, then it feels like the structure would completely fall apart. It would be like invaded by some sort of virus. And that type of precision is very deceptive because it is very sturdy, it's very strong at the center of everything, and it allows for that illusion to exist. So that, like the most delicate, or the more soft, more intricate elements of things at the surface are allowed to exist in that way. And in terms of the way this movie makes you feel, just initially, that is very integral to the whole thing as well, all a part of the puzzle. Because this movie has just like a movement to it. It feels like a cascading river. It's never really stopping. And it reminds me of petals or leaves that are fanning out in a really interesting, beautiful way. And it just, all of this is escalating to a fever pitch in ways that are constantly keeping you on your toes in a way that expresses the full spectrum of emotions that are so inherently deep within us. Often the things we keep hidden. And he's more than happy to show that to you, but you have to earn it, I think, in order for it to fully ignite in a way that feels satisfactory. And the movie has such a unique feeling about it. Initially, when I'm watching it, it feels almost like Western in appeal, but also very European, just in the aesthetic and everything. And that makes sense because it is inspired by kind of like a Victorian era crime novel, and it just becomes more of like an erotic psychological thriller that uses Korea under the Japanese rule as the framework of the story. So that is the cornerstone of the tension in kind of the grand sense of the story. And it operates kind of on its own logic at times, but you just go with it. You go with kind of like the Victorian vision that we all know. There's many Gothic stories and they all involve the typical cliches of like the ladies and the delicate lace and the corsets. So it is kind of jarring in this movie, especially just like culturally. The architecture of the main house or whatever, it's like a mix of British style and then cut right in half. The rest is Japanese. So that's very interesting. And the way this film is shot, there's just a real vibrancy to the colors and an openness to the visual style. It feels almost like I don't know, like Beauty and the Beast. It has like that feeling of like an enchanted castle. And when everyone's dressed in very rigid corsets, everything just feels a little bit more shameful and like shunning of the primal instinct. And even though they're like different pieces of different genres, I almost get elements of horror, like I said, like enchanted castle, gothic imagery, that sort of thing. It has a real kind of innocence to it, weirdly, or like a whimsy, a mysticism that is always surging through it. It very much feels like it has the influence of an Asian fable. It's like a story that might have been inspired by like a great Hokusai painting or something. And like I said, the colors are very rich, they're very detailed, but also very bright at the same time, and very sumptuous. There's just an aching eroticism in this movie, and you feel it in everything, whether it is literal or whether it is more figurative, but we just latch onto it as audience members. I don't know, I just think of like sparkling. This film has a sparkling type of energy to it, and it never, for me at least, it never lost its luster. And I think it's best for you to go in with very little setup. Just don't know a lot and let yourself experience everything. Just let the story unfold. But you do have a very complicated relationship between three different people. There's a lot of tension going on between those characters. You have two women and you have a male between them that is trying to assert a sense of dominance. Each character has a very specific motive, but also each character is lying in some form when it comes to that motive. And the duplicity, these characters are just weaving around each other, very much like snakes. And while new plans are being forged in one area, new revelations are coming to light in another area. So the way they play off each other, it's very detailed. It is like a Rubik's Cube or something. You have three pros who are desperate for some form of freedom, each for their very own reasons, as I said. And that's where I think the Korean-Japanese setting as the backdrop is very important. It is like their haunting reminder of the past. These characters are trying to leave the past behind. They know, what it means to have to sacrifice, to fight for a sense of survival. And that is why they've been able to become so cunning. And the desire for freedom in our male character, even though he is the antagonist, is one that is actually quite relatable, strangely, because, he wants that freedom from the oppression of his country. A liberation from war, political turmoil, from class oppression, etc. Those things are important. And the female characters in this film have a similar need for liberation like that, but also theirs is more in the form of male oppression. And you peel another layer from that and you realize there's a need to be free from deep pain, of never really having the identity that you want. Freedom from the feeling that death or pain are your only two options in life. So when I watch this film, for me, it's signifying a rebirth of each character. One of my favorite things about Park Chan-wook and his style as a director is that he is very interested in the illusions of cinema, and I enjoy how he goes about lifting the curtain of manipulation to surprise us in ways that really subvert our expectations. And he does this by showing us a singular story, typically from different angles, and by withholding information from the audience right at the perfect time. And he has to be very clever about how he employs this. And he's always giving you clues. It's just that they're very tastefully employed into the story, in a way that you don't need to make sense of them on an initial viewing, even multiple viewings. They're not necessarily integral to the central plot. They just kind of build peripherally in the mind of the viewer, and it's slowly just building the full mosaic. It's all working together even before the light bulb comes on and we're like, oh wow, here's the revelation, here's the conclusion. And this one is a game of control, a game of perceptions. What secrets are we privy to as viewers, and for what reasons? And what new context is provided for you, especially when you watch it multiple times. That's always very interesting for me. And how does it change the way you view each characters and as a whole in the situation? I do think that idea is maybe more pointed in terms of how it's trying to evoke the cautionary tale feel in a movie like Oldboy. Whereas here, I think all the manipulative elements are populating the work more in like a seamless fashion. And I think that is more just by nature of the story. It's a different type of story. And of course, the act of playing parts within a story and deceiving the characters within the story and outside of the story, all of it does feel like an examination of the cinematic language, the act of filmmaking. But with a little something extra, with like kind of a ripe, robust energy to kind of show it in a more unique way. For example, with this movie, it goes for about a third of the movie and you're totally going on for the ride. You're very, very engaged in it, and then it just stops. The story stops and we rewind and we see that whole opening section again, but from a different point of view. And that is very, very tricky to do. It's very easy to completely cause the momentum to stop, and yet it doesn't. And it could perhaps feel like a very shallow gimmick. And perhaps, yes, it is a gimmick to a degree, but to me, I think it contributes to his overall philosophy of how context affects audiences, how context can change the outcome and how it can change how you view somebody morally even. All that stuff, you know, is very dangerous, I think. And maybe this particular way it's done is not the most nuanced or most creative thing I've seen from Park Chan-wook, especially since so many aspects of that serpentine narrative are so surprising, but it's still very, very effective, I think. And yes, as I said before, because this is inspired by a Victorian crime novel, there are a lot of cliches and there's a lot of like cinematic devices that are your typical go-tos for that type of story. Staples of Victorian era repression through the costumes, through the visual symbols. And I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, like usually these metaphors feel very empty or they feel very lazy or trite. But here it's like we are right in it. And that's why the emotion feels so potent, because we're very much in the heart of the storm with the characters, feeling every risk. One of my favorite things about this particular film is the way that all of the symbols exist within the framework of the story, as I said, in a way where they don't need to be revealed. As in, the plot does not hinge on a big revelation there in the way it would for, you know, like most MacGuffins. But no, we are reworking the framework here and we are breathing life into something that I consider very romanticized typically, but we're reinfusing that romanticism. It's still romantic, but I swear, I feel like I could talk about the film all day just because it is so dense. There's so much richness to every single scene, and there's just not a singular aspect of focus ever. I mean, even as a viewer, if you happen to have a moment where your focus is singular, there are still like 50 different things around it that have been planted and are building it and have been working to build it the entire movie. And they all have to be nuanced in their own intricate ways, and they all have to intersect at the right moments. It's all perfectly choreographed. I do not envy these screenwriters. And sometimes that feeling can be too ambiguous, but you have such faith in the structure building around you that you just let it take you. It's all adding up in your subconscious like a mist that is rising. It is just really, really magnificent. My God, it's magnificent. It is truly just a symphony of moving pieces that create some perfect harmony, and it hits a real sweet spot for me, no pun intended. But yeah, intimacy, secrecy is the very important mood here, and it's existing in a multitude of ways, whether it is perverse or whether it is pure. The mysteries of life and the human condition are always revealing themselves. They never stop. And this film just, it's like, you know, constantly trying to find different combinations. And is it clicking? Is it clicking? Is it clicking? And then it clicks. And, you know, if you just really like things that open your soul, that inspire you creatively, this is the film for you. This is a magnificent piece of work. I absolutely adore it. And that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website. As always, it is deepfocuslens.com. I am an artist and I do commissioned portraits, and I also sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Also, I would like to give a shout out to my patrons who are wonderful. Thank you guys so much for your support. If you are interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.